Morning to you all. My name is Lynette Ong, Professor of Political Science at the Munk School of Global Affairs and Public Policy at the University of Toronto. I wish to acknowledge this land on which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and most recently, the Mississaugas of the Credit River. Today, this meeting place is still the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. I'm delighted today to be hosting this webinar to discuss Professor Ya-Wen Lei's latest book, The Gilded Age, Techno-State Capitalism in China. Ya-Wen Lei is a professor in the Department of Sociology at Harvard University, and also affiliated with the Fairbanks Center for Chinese Studies and the Weatherhead Center for International Affairs. Trained in both law and sociology, she holds an LLM and JSD from Yale Law School and a PhD in sociology from the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor. After graduating from Michigan in 2013, she was a junior fellow at the Society of Fellows at Harvard University. She's the author of 2 books. Her first book was The Contentious Public Sphere, Law, Media, and Authoritarian Rule in China, published by Princeton University Press in 2018. She has also published articles in leading sociology journals such as the Annual Review of Sociology, American Sociological Review, American Journal of Sociology, Law and Society Review, and so forth. And her publications have received various awards from the American Sociological Association, the Law and Society Association, as well as the China Quarterly. So it is indeed my very pleasure today to be hosting Ya-Wen's talk. So the stage is over to you.
Thank you so much, Lynette. Let me share my screen. Okay, good morning, everyone. In fact, I'm having a cold and having a fever now. But I think I still can actually deliver the talk because the event will only last for an hour. That should be okay for me. And thank you, Lynette, for the very generous introduction. And so today I'm going to talk about my latest book, The Gilded Cage. And I want to begin from the story. A story. And in 1998, President Bill Clinton made a forward-looking visit to China. So just 2 years before, he convinced the U.S. Congress to approve China's accession to the WTO. And the trip drew a lot of criticism in the U.S. because it broke a 9-year hiatus during which American president had avoided visiting China after the 1989 Tiananmen democratic movement. And during his trip, President Clinton held a roundtable discussion at the Shanghai Library on the topic of shaping China for the 21st century. So at one point, Clinton shared his vision of China's future. So he said that I believe this will happen because of technological revolution. I think in your economic growth, you will almost leap over a whole generation of economic experiences that older European country and perhaps the US experience, where you will essentially, by creating an industrialized and a post-industrial society at the same time. So the key terms here are like industrialized and post-industrial society. So upon hearing the news that Clinton had mentioned the post-industrial society in China, sociologist Daniel Bell, who actually retired from my department at that time, was very surprised. He reached out to the National Security Council to ask about who had written Clinton's talk. So when he found out that Clinton's comments were impromptu, Bell was very happy to see how influential his ideas had become. So Bell's work was very influential in the past, but I think nowadays very few sociology students read his work. But since the 1960s, Bell had developed the concept of post-industrial society. I know many scholars define a post-industrial society with reference to the rise of the service sector. But Bell actually clarified that the novel features of post-industrial society were the mutually generative relationship between science, technology, and economy, and very importantly, the enhancement of what he calls instrumental power based on technology over people. So according to Bell, the design of post-industrial society is a game between person in which intellectual technology based on information, data, computing, algorithm programming rise alongside machine technology. So these are the buzzwords we heard a lot frequently today, but he was writing about these things back in the 60s. And but importantly, when he was developing the concepts of post-industrial society, that was in a context of the New Deal. And then at that time, the welfare state was very strong. And he was imagining that the state would play a very critical role in promoting more technological oriented development, social economic development. And he was very optimistic about the shared prosperity in post-industrial society. And then there is only abundance, and he didn't really expect the continuing existence or the worsening problem of social inequality. But decades after the publication of his work on post-industrial society, we saw the situation, the development in reality. So Daniel Bell didn't really expect the decline of the New Deal order and the rise of a new liberal order. And here I just want to show you the two very influential books that handles the consequences of technology in our society. So the first book is Zubov's book titled The Age of Surveillance Capitalism. So it just shows that like tech companies has used technology to survey and then to profits in our daily life. And then I also mention Ajamolu and also Simon Johnson's book on power and technology and progress. So basically, this recent work showed that people like the power holders of technology, for example, company, they can replace jobs through automation, and both tech companies and certain governments can use technology for surveillance in our daily life and in work. And then this kind of process led to resulting inequality. But then Ajamolu also emphasizes that different the negative consequences of technology-oriented development is really not inevitable, but institutions, narrative like culture, and also collective actions play a very crucial role in terms of the outcome of a more technological-oriented development. And now I move to the Chinese case. So to a large extent, the future projected by both Clinton and Bell has been realized in China. So China has emerged as one of the two global digital superpowers. And the process of China's technology development is also a process of post-industrial transformation. And due to China's success, some scholars said that China has been experiencing a gilded age. But there is a dark side behind the gilded facade. And to see through the facade, I think we have to understand the transformation of China's birdcage economy. And many government officials in China have used the term bird and cage to refer to the economy and the state control. And they said that China should let a bird fly, but only within a state-managed cage, because otherwise the bird would fly away. And in the past, in the beginning of the reform, the government didn't really distinguish between different kinds of birds. However, in the mid-2000s, in the process of pursuing a techno development, the government began to distinguish old birds from new birds, and it became clear that now they didn't welcome old birds, which referred to obsolete capital and labor, and instead they wanted to develop cutting-edge new birds. And in this kind of process, the internet sector was selected as a pillar industry and one of the most important new birds after the 2008 financial crisis. And after conducting fieldwork in China since 2010, I observed two issues. The first issue concerned the fate of the old birds. And previous experiences of deindustrialization in the US and Europe suggest that people and business may be left behind by such transformation. And this raises question about how the government has managed capital and worker in all sectors, particularly given the country's official socialist ideology and already very high level of social inequality. And the second issue concerned the cage, a control mechanism that seemed to be growing in complexity with the emergence of intellectual technology and big data. And how has the Chinese government constructed the cage to guide the country's technology development, and what are the impacts? So essentially, my research aims to uncover the social order and contradictions that have emerged in the process of China's techno development. So basically, I try to argue that we should have some kind of agenda to study a different kind of techno-developmental regimes across societies and over time. So I building upon literature on the developmental stage and also the history of technology. So I use the term techno-developmental regime to refer to the ensemble of state and non-state actors, institution, ideas, cultural norms, forms of reality and practice that foreground the role of science and technology in social economic development. So basically, my work emphasizes the role of the government and also the materiality of techno developmental regime, because different kind of technology, different kind of technique have different kind of materiality. And also I also emphasize the cultural dimension, ideas, and also belief about technology, and also look at how different kind of political regime have lead to different kind of different type of techno developmental regime. So basically, I try to use the Chinese case in dialogue with previous literature, and then to develop my research agenda. So, and now let me briefly talk about my methodology. So my book focuses on the period of the mid-2000 to 2023 because China's labor-intensive manufacturing began to encounter problems in the mid-2000s. And as we know that post-industrial development is a very uneven process across and within countries. And I was very lucky that I began to do field work in Guangdong, in China, in 2009 for my GSD dissertation that looked at the cell phone industry in China from the perspective of intellectual property rights. And Guangdong is where China's economic reform began and a forerunner of techno development. And because of my decade-long research experiences there, I was able to observe change over time from the since the early days of financial crisis to 2023. So this map show you the places where I conducted field work as I developed my project. And here are the settings where I conducted field work. In the traditional sectors, I did interviews and ethnography in factories, including those are considered obsolete by local governments, and those attempted to upgrade themselves through automation and robotization. And staying in these kind of factories for weeks was super helpful because I was able to observe the interaction between local governments and businesses. And when I was doing field work in the factories, I noticed that many of my interviewees left the factories and moved to the platform sectors and to become a delivery worker. And some of them invited me to follow them. So I followed some of my interviewees. So I began to study the emerging sector in the platform economy. So I interviewed workers and management in the food delivery platform economy and conducted ethnography. I also interviewed software engineers and management in internet company. So I collected over 250 in-depth interview. So basically, this book is a combination, kind of try to bridge like two type of literature. One is the developmental states, but previous study, for example, they look at the typical case, the classical case of Korea and Taiwan, but those kind of development unfolded not in the era of digital economy. And then the second group of literature that I have conversation with is the literature on digital capitalism, surveillance capitalism. And that literature kind of focus more on the big tech companies. But because of this case they study, for example, most of the literature focus on the US case. So they really downplay the role of the government. So I try to bridge this kind of study and the literature, and I look at I try to conduct analysis across multiple levels. For example, I have more kind of macro level analysis about the policy, but I also look at how this kind of process unfolded in different in the old sector and also in the emerging platform sector, and how that kind of process influence different social group. So here is the basic argument of the book. So in a nutshell, so I argue that an instrumental apparatus established by state actors began to emerge as the Chinese government endeavored to move from an economy relying on labor-intensive, export-oriented manufacturing to what I call techno-state capitalism, which is a digital capitalist system characterized by the rise of tech capital and then a symmetrically symbiotic relationship between tech capital and the state. And then this instrumental apparatus has expanded with the growth of techno capitalism as large tech companies began to participate in the making of the instrumental apparatus. So I will show you more detail about what I mean by this kind of instrument created by both the Chinese government and then the big tech companies. So, so basically the instruments created by both the government and tech companies have produced unequal social consequences and contradictions that eventually made the Chinese government rewire the cage. And I also, in the book, I also try to argue that China's a specific type of developmental state, a mixed ideology of high modernism, techno-nationalism, and meritocracy, and the country's authoritarian regime explain the characteristic of China's techno-developmental regime. So I will kind of unpack my argument. So first, I just want to explain the emergence of this kind of specific techno-developmental regime in China, and I want to focus. So first, I want to kind of discuss its cultural or ideological dimension. So my colleague, very prominent anthropologist Susan Greenhill, has argued that using science and technology to rejuvenate China has been the cultural DNA of the Chinese nation since the 19th century, the late 19th century. So there is a long standing of wanting to use science and technology to for development. And I also want to mention that so when even though when a country moves from a more kind of labor-intensive economy to a more tech-oriented economy, it seems that there is only like one path. But in fact, Chinese leaders have very different visions on how they can achieve techno development. And some leaders they actually worry about the consequences on the tension between technology and equality, but some other officials try to neglect this kind of tension. And then I also want to mention that in China, because of the penetration of this kind of techno-developmentalism in society, so the government's techno-development, this kind of the strategy to use technology to facilitate, promote development has received a lot of support, and it also aligned with the idea of the dominance of thinking of meritocracy in China. So that's the cultural dimension. So even though, and now I want to focus on the specific transition in the mid 2000s and the social, economic, and political dimensions, conditions at that time. So despite the so I mentioned that there has been a long standing of culture that, but then the government didn't really begin to seriously attempted to move toward a techno-oriented development model until the mid 2000s. And that happened in coastal provinces in China. So that happened actually in provincial levels. At that time, so that's before the financial crisis, provinces like Guangdong and Zhejiang and Jiangsu began to experience scarcity in important resources like land, especially land, energy, electricity, and so they just realized that they didn't really have enough land to pursue the kind of the labor-intensive manufacturing. Because when we talk about labor-intensive export-oriented manufacturing, we often neglect the fact that it's actually quite land-intensive. So usually the Chinese government has to give a huge piece of land to investors, but they just realized that in coastal province, they didn't have enough land to do that. And at that time, housing market also began to prosper, and land became more expensive. And around the same time, the Hu Jintao, the central leader, also began to articulate the idea of scientific concept of development to solve China's developmental problems. And the coastal provinces, a lot of local government officials, they began to promote to scientize the per cage economy. So basically, the idea is the solution to the problem of scarcity is to mobilize science and technology and use legal and technical instruments to help the government's visible hand and to coordinate the relationship between the market and also the state. And and then the financial crisis in 2008 worsened the situation because it hit China's export markets severely. But I also want to mention that, so in kind of coming up with the solution to focus on the new birds and to expel the old birds, at that time, still like in 2010, so there were still 242 million migrant workers in the 4 provinces in Guangdong, Jiangsu, Zhejiang, and Shandong, and also 50% of them were so 50% of these migrant workers were only in these 4 provinces, and 36% of them were in manufacturing. So you can think about really the consequences of this kind of developmental models to the disadvantaged group in China. And now I just want to talk a little bit about the instruments they use. So basically, the idea is to adjust and establish various technical and regulatory tools and to classify and evaluate labor and capital, because now not every kind of labor or capital was equal, and the government wanted to select and to identify more valuable labor and capital and allocate them with better resources. So so they began to adjust existing instruments or add new ones in order to do this kind of classification and evaluation, and in order to allocate all kinds of resources. So this kind of resources, resources include resources for production, such as subsidy, bank credits, land use rights, state procurement, like government contracts, and also very importantly, regulatory toleration and exemption. So, and then they also use also kind of evaluate different kind of labor to decide who deserve access to public services. So these are the resources for social reproduction, such as citizenship rights and access to public housing, affordable housing, or public school. And also they also kind of give different kind of punishments and decide different level of law enforcement according to the value of capital. So and then and this all happened in an increasingly repressive political environment after Xi took power. And I also wanted to mention that Xi Jinping was a party secretary in Zhejiang during this period when this model began to emerge, and he actually wrote a lot of things, a lot of essays on industrial policy already at that time. And you can imagine that when he took power, a lot of local government officials at different level began to emulate the policy he made when he was the party secretary in Zhejiang provinces. So here I just want to show you how the local government thought about their developmental model at that time. So these are two quotes from local government officials in Guangdong province in Shenzhen, and one is from Wang Yang, who was Guangdong party secretary. So basically what they want is really to expel the low quality population and to attract R&D and what they consider high quality of people. So this just give you an example of the instrument they use to decide to actually incentivize government officials and business actors and ordinary citizens. So this example is how they adjust the metric system to evaluate local government. So as many of you know that in the past, a lot of local government officials were evaluated according to the local GDP growth rates. But now after they adopted the model, they incorporate like high and new tech products or R&D expenditure or the modern service industry. So this kind of, they incorporate this kind of thing in their evaluation model to incentivize local government officials so that they know which direction to go. And this is how they evaluate companies. So if certain company are they are classified as higher new technology, and they can actually receive a lot of benefits. And these are the criteria they use to evaluate, such as intellectual property rights, and an R&D expenditure. So they actually the main point they kind of set up a lot of enact a lot of evaluation standard, and this also reflect in how they adjust the household registration system to decide who have priority to get local citizenships. So as you can see, so the ability, so this is an example from Guangzhou, but there are so many these kind of things in the most prosperous areas in China. And this example was enacted in 2011. So you can see like invention and also what they call personal quality education skill competition, invention, like the ability to invent, to have patents. So, and also like age, that's a very important aspect of human capital. So these kind of things were a lot of already existing institutions were readjusted to align with the new goal of technology development. And this is another example that, so they also created a lot of digital platforms to evaluate each single companies. So they want to calculate the revenues produced by a company per unit of land. So they want to calculate a revenue per unit by units of land. So, and then if a company are classified into different categories, if a company is classified into a good category, then they actually they can have a lot of benefits, and the utility rates, the utility bill, and the government actually subsidize the utility bill. So these are just a lot of some of the numerous example in which the government developed and adjusted their metric and evaluation systems. So there are a lot of focus on establishing this kind of rules, the technical and the legal instruments. And the legal instruments are also very important because it determines the outcome. So once you are classified into certain category, and that could have some kind of legal outcome or regulatory outcomes. And so so I do want to show that the state at the local level and in many parts of China, and also to some extent at central level, they created this kind of instrument. And for those of you who are familiar with the China's economic development in the past, so usually a lot of scholars argue that China's success was partly because of the flexibility in the regime, but then I argue that since the mid 2000s, actually things began to change and toward a more unflexible way. They focus more on this kind of tools, and these have some kind of consequences. So and this the kind of tools they created also show the class dimension of this kind of techno developmental regime, because they really systematically benefit certain class like professional class and technical class, but then they systematically discriminated against the working class. So in the process of this kind of development, the internet the sector emerged of one of China's pillars industry. So as you can see from this graph, so the digital economy's proportion of China's GDP rose from around 15% in 2004 to 40% in 2022. So today, people were excited about China's like new energy EV sector, but those sector only accounted for around 11% of China's GDP at this moment. Because after the internet sector was selected as a new bird by the Chinese government, they were able to access global capital and protect the domestic market. And they will also be able to partner with the Chinese government in all kinds of projects domestically and also internationally. And at the same time, they were able to operate in a more or less lax regulatory environment. So basically a freer cage. And so many of you might remember the Chinese government began to crack down on the tech sector in around 2020, but based on China's anti-monopoly law, which was enacted in 2008. But between 2008 and 2020, in fact, back in 2008, there were already a lot of complaints about tech companies' behavior. They sue each other, but Chinese government never really intervened and never investigated any tech companies until 2020. So there is a period in time in which the government decided not to enforce the law despite the existence of law. And in this kind of lax regulatory environment, we can observe boundary spanning instrumental, and that we can see that a lot of tech companies began to develop boundary spanning instrumental and infrastructure power. So in China, a lot of infrastructures is owned by state-owned corporations, state-owned enterprises, but the digital infrastructure, like the online payment system, cloud infrastructure, is in large part owned by private companies. That's China's tech companies. And also after the China's economy began to slow down in 2015, the government actually doubled down on their support of the tech companies because the platform sector was considered as the savior of the economic slowdown. But I also want to mention that you can see that the kind of job created in this process tend to be labor intensive service job instead of skill intensive service jobs. And we also see the increase of informal employment in this period. So meaning that a lot of jobs don't really have social protection. They are not protected by China's labor law. And this kind of characteristic is associated with the platform economy. So a lot of people expect that this kind of techno-oriented development model would lead to a lot of like a huge increase of good job. But in fact, in China, it's created more like low-skilled service-oriented job. And at the same time, so like the tech companies in the US, China's tech companies began to have a lot of power and develop their own digital kingdoms within the countries because they were tolerated by the Chinese government to have their own digital kingdoms. And in under a lax regulatory environment, large tech companies were able to use legal and also technical instruments to set the rules for workers, users, and suppliers. So these are similar to a lot of people's criticism of big techs in other parts of the world. Yeah, so and now I just want to point out that in fact the Chinese the government and also the tech companies in China, these big tech, they share a lot similarity. So because the Chinese government has the political monopoly and the tech company, they have some kind of monopolistic power in the economy, and they were both able to make a lot of rules and also enact a lot of different kind of instruments within their own jurisdiction. The Chinese government has the power to make a lot of law, enact a lot of instruments, but within the digital kingdom acknowledged by the Chinese government, the tech companies also enjoy a lot of freedoms and a lot of power to make the kind of rules and also a technical instrument that they want to impose. And now I want to actually talk about the problems, the tensions created by this kind of techno-developmental regime. So the first is a disparity between reality and appearance. So the government created a lot of instruments to increase efficiency and legibility. They want to know which company like produce what and how to classify things and how to actually better how to kind of allocate resources in a more efficient way. But in my field work, I observe like officials, business actors, and workers, they are all playing the game according to the rules set by the government. And then in this kind of process, people actually focus more on the instrument themselves and the end and the means. But then they kind of forgot about the purpose of creating this kind of instrument. The purpose was to develop perhaps a better economy, but then the focus but for example, a lot of local government officials, they focus a lot on like the numbers of robots, the number of workers replaced by robot, the number of patents created in the system, because these kind of numbers were used to evaluate the local government's performance. And in my fieldwork, I also noticed that some lowest level of government officials and also a lot of business owners, they actually know the system don't really work. they don't work in a very efficient way, but their feedback is often overlooked because their feedback cannot be translated into the metric in the evaluation system. So you can see there is a lot of waste of public resources. And for example, I study in some provinces, the local governments actually want to promote the agenda of using robots to replace human beings, and the government invested a lot of money in robots. But then when you ask local business people, they usually tell you that they think like 70% of this money was actually scammed by various actors. And the second problem I observe is the tension between the state and capital. So the government want to use the instrument to increase the level of control and predictability, but in reality, you see the government actually created a bifurcated regulatory environment. So usually they see some kind of trade-off between development and regulation. And when they think some business obsolete, they begin to initiate a lot of campaign and to impose a lot of rule or to enforce law in a hyperactive manner. And then if they consider something as like new births, they actually create a very lax regulatory environment. So in a very strict environment, no one can, because things were so unpredictable, and no one can actually calculate the risk, and it's very difficult to conduct business. And in a very lax regulatory environment, a lot of problems, tensions accumulated, and the government didn't solve them and didn't handle them seriously. And in the end, this kind of a regulatory system created a new birds, like the internet sector, that almost bursted the cage. And in the end, the government condemned them as excessive expansion of capital. And usually the government reacted to this kind of accumulated risk with harsh punishment. And the third tension I observe is the tension between the state and the citizens regarding citizenship rights. So in the mid-2000s, at that time, so the government already observed increasing level of inequality, and they did wanted to solve the problem regarding equality. But then you see that in the process of promoting technology development, they also created a lot of institutions that systematically discriminated against the working class and people without local housing properties and their children. And then, so in my research, I observe a lot of protests initiated by workers to fight for their children's right to go to school. This is a quote from a factory manager in Shenzhen. So he said that a recent protests here were about school issues because migrant worker children have difficulty going to local public school under the point-based school admission system, which is another kind of matrix-based evaluation system. So in the old days, the government gave my company some quota for employees' children to go to local public school, but now the government gave quota to high-tech company like Huawei because people there are talent and people in my factories are low-end. And then another kind of tension is the tension between tech capital and labor. So because of the in 2021, so there were more than 200 million people in China have some kind of flexible employment. So many of them actually worked in the platform sectors, and because of China's lax regulatory environment, so I compare a lot of this kind of platform company with platform company in the US and also in Europe, in France. And I found that Chinese tech platform company, they imposed the most intensive control on workers. And so in my So in my field work, I observed a lot of protests and strikes organized by platform workers, and I also study the rise and the disillusion of coding elites, the professional class. So these are the kind of consequences for the relationship between the capital and also the labor. So, and what are the consequences of this kind of techno-developmental regime? So I think in general, I still feel that the gilded facade of the cage still convince a large proportion of my interviewees that the Chinese government actually still did a good job, because China was able to become a technology and powerhouse within a very short period of time. And then some of my interviewees kind of internalize the dominant discourse and consider themselves unworthy. And in the process of playing the game, that process manufacture consent to the existing rules. But then the fading facade, but in recent years, some Chinese people also began to observe the fading facade, and some people found like the games became very meaningless and decided not to continuously to play the game. So you can see, we can observe the exits, right? There are more and more immigrants from China to other parts of the world. But then I think the kind of localized voice and resistance would continue to exist, but they are very restricted. So basically, I think this story is really
when you might want to wrap up soon.
Just one slide. So this is a case in which instrumental rationality grew tremendously, but then the communicative rationality declined a lot. So that's the instances. This example is we can kind of think about this example from like Max Weber's writing about iron cage. So and I also think, even though the Chinese government at one moment they want to pursue both scientific development and also human-centered development, but because of the political condition, in the end, the instrumental aspect of development overshadow the human aspects of development. I think I just wrap up, finish my talk. Yeah, thanks.
Great, that was very interesting. Thank you so much. So I have some clarification questions, and I'm sure there'll be more questions from the audience. So when you talk about the high tech sector, are you referring to e-commerce and platform economies type of companies rather than companies that manufacture hardwares, for example, Huawei? Because I think that is kind of reflected in the human composition of the people that they hire. You were saying that in spite of technological development, there's actually more informal workers and more low-skilled workers low-skilled jobs being created. So I'm wondering about what sort of high-tech companies are you typically referring to?
Should I answer right now? Yeah. Okay.
So let me just ask you one more question. So when you talk about kind of the concept of the cage, I think the concept first came from Chen Yun, right, who proposed it during the 80s, saying that the market economy has to be developed within the state planned type of cage. But in your context, your analogy of cage refers to regulation, kind of the political institutions, cadre evaluation, migrant workers, the institutions that guide the high tech industries. Am I getting you right?
Yeah. Oh, thank you so much, Lynette, for the question. So I just answered the two questions. So first question is about the kind of like new births that I study. So there are all kinds of different kind of tech company, but my book, I kind of in my introduction, I kind of intentionally select the digital sectors, because that's one of the most important part of the economy, and they are, and also I wanted to talk to the literature on the digital economy, the platform economy in other parts of the world, and because of this true reason, I focus on kind of the tech companies, that platform companies, that type of company, instead of a company that produce some kind of hardware. But I think there are some, for example, like, but that doesn't really negate the fact that the Chinese government also evaluate those kind of advanced manufacturing business actors. Right? Yeah, but I think this kind of high platform companies, they, because of the nature of their technology, like a lot of literature talk about their instrumental power, how they influence individual, and how they influence control, or how they control the like digital infrastructure. So I think that kind of platform companies are also very, very important. So I intentionally focus more on that kind of the platform, the big tech companies. Yeah. And the second question.
Sorry,
yeah.
just to clarify. So when Xi Jinping say so we must draw on the new productive forces of the
That's
economy.
a recent comment. Yeah.
Right. But you looked at the other side of kind of the productive forces.
Yeah.
Not the BYD, the EV vehicles manufacturer, but the platform side of things.
Because I kind of my case is very historically specific. I study until the recent moment, and then I think that's my study. I focus more on the beginning of the U.S.-China trade tension, and that's toward the end of not the end, kind of the end of the previous stage of neoliberal globalization. And in my book, I kind of make it, I think in the conclusion chapter, I make it very clear that the government actually, this kind of model developed dynamically, and then things will continue to change because of the new global conditions, and they will select the new birds, right? But I think what are the new birds? The new birds might differ in different kind of stage. And at this time, maybe they realize that the previous selections were were not super satisfying. And then, for example, I think the central government think some kind of technology used by these kind of big techs are not really cutting edge, or are not that kind of crucial in terms of geopolitical tension. Yeah, so I think it's not surprising that they would adjust this kind of select new birds and or decide who are all birds dynamically in different kind of global contexts. Yeah, and the second question is about the cage. Yeah, so I think the cage come from Chen Yun's talk and thinking. Yeah, and in my case, in my study, I kind of focus on the rules of the game. So what are the rules, the regulation, the instrument created by the governments, and also the big tech companies to guide or to and to guide the development of China's economy, or to not only guide is a very strong word, yeah, but this kind of rules created by the government and big tech became very important, like a structure of the economy, political economy. Yeah.
Sure. So let me go to the audience question. A question from Jawad Khan. Could you comment on the changes in the education sector regarding the 2021 ban on China of for-profit tutoring services, and how that ties in with technology development? Would this be considered an old bird and perhaps lead into the digital kingdoms in a country which can afford to offer non-profit tutoring for youth and a pipeline for for-profit tutoring for post-secondary?
Yeah, I think the educational problem is really complicated, and it's beyond my personal expertise. And I do think the Chinese government want to solve the problem of of stress because because of the stress in the education system. So the problem, there are some problems in the education system. So first is it creates a lot of stress to parents, and people are crazy in terms of achieving some kind of educational goal. And then, and also some people also kind of concerned about inequality, because when you have this kind of companies providing services, then people with more capital, they can actually utilize these services. But the problem is that I think no one is convinced that just cracking down on the educational tech companies actually solve the problem that the governments are concerned. Yeah, so and I think sometimes really the Chinese, the government's strategies are quite ad hoc. And you see they actually, sometimes they do this and sometimes they see the negative consequences and they change their minds. And it just kind of fluctuates a lot. Yeah.
Sure. And another question for Yuxuan Sun. Thanks to Professor Lei for the talk. As a fellow sociologist, I would like to ask whether there are existing studies or preliminary reports on the salience of technocratic nationalist ideology among the Chinese people. It is well known that people who uphold this ideology lurks around online forum, Zhihu. Do you think this ideology will be mobilized by the state in the future?
Yeah, I don't know about this kind of techno nationalism ideology, but in my book, I did include analysis of war value data. So in which, so from that data, you can see that compared with other people in other parts of the world, Chinese people, they have more optimistic view on technology and the least critical view on technology, and that's for sure. And when people actually, so usually people think like for example, Korea and Taiwan, Singapore, these are the kind of typical example of like developmental, especially Korea, Taiwan are typical example of developmental states. But then if you look at the world value survey, like people in Taiwan and people in Korea, they have very kind of more critical view on technology compared with people in China. So I think, and also so China really ranks consistently number number one or number two, number three in all kinds of questions about technology. So they are really really enthusiastic and optimistic about technology. And also a lot of some studies show that they kind of are less critical of the surveillance technology, and they are also less critical about a lot of like gene editing technology, compared with other parts of the world. So unfortunately, those kind of survey didn't really contain question about like they only ask about like technology related things, but I think they also have a question about nationalism. So I didn't really measure that part, but then if you are interested in this question, go to the you can analyze the world value survey to simultaneously and analyze questions on attitude toward technology and also nationalism. Maybe you can find something interesting.
Sure. Comment from Bob MacArthur. Even with fighting a cold and a fever, Yao Wen has made a fine presentation. So, so let me ask you this. So you referred to, so what's your parallel of your work with Yuan Ang's book, which is called, the Gilded Age, but you call it the Gilded Cage. Can you tell us the parallel?
Yeah, so actually her book, so I think her book focuses on more a different historical period, right? So, and I think her book try to talk about explain the success of China. And I think I agree with that. But I think things have been changing. And so I'm not only talking about the book on the Gilded, so the book on the Gilded Age, and also another book, right, on poverty, right? So I think basically her explanation is that China's success to a large extent depends on like the flexibility of the local government. So actually local governments had some kind of place to improvise, right? And what I'm showing is that this kind of place has been reducing over time since the mid 2000s. So that's one part. And also, I think her analysis of the Gilded Age, so she talked about corruptions. But at that time, the corruptions existed, but then the economy still prosper because to some extent, people can still, business actors can still expect that like the direction of the government. So they had kind of better ability to predict what the government would do and to make money from their economic activity. But in my story, I kind of try to show that not only the environment became more unflexible, but then it's also very difficult to predict the government's actions because sometimes when they classify things in this way, then things kind of move in a very extreme way. And I think this kind of my analysis, I think, can complement Professor Yuan An's analysis and just show the changing structures of China, the political economy over time. Yeah.
Okay, that's very interesting. I think that's a good point, good note to end our seminar today. Thank you so much for your time, Professor Lei, and thank you everyone for attending. I wish you a good day.